The sound of a child crying carried across the high desert plains like a ghost wailing in the wind, and Vincent Bradford reined in his horse so hard the animal nearly reared. The Union Pacific tracks stretched in both directions, empty and gleaming under the fierce August sun of 1882. But there beside them sat a boy no more than 5 years old, his face streaked with dirt and tears. Vincent dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the rocky ground with a thud, and approached the child with the careful movements of a man who had learned gentleness the hard way. "Hey there, little man," Vincent said, kneeling down so his tall frame would not frighten the boy further. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The child looked up at him with eyes red from crying, his small body trembling despite the heat that shimmered off the iron rails. He wore a simple cotton shirt and trousers that had seen better days, and his feet were protected by worn shoes that looked too big for him. "Where is your mama?" Vincent asked gently, looking around at the vast emptiness that surrounded them. They were a good 10 miles from Shoshone City, Idaho, and there was nothing out here but sagebrush and jackrabbits. The boy opened his mouth, but only a sob came out. Vincent felt his heart clench in his chest, that old familiar ache that reminded him why he had left Texas 5 years ago, why he had ridden north until he found a place where nobody knew his name or his history. He reached out slowly and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It is all right," he said. "I am not going to hurt you. My name is Vincent. Can you tell me your name?" "Thomas," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind that swept across the plain. "Thomas, that is a good, strong name." Vincent smiled, trying to ease the fear he saw in those young eyes. "Can you tell me what happened? Where is your mama?" Thomas pointed down the tracks toward the west, his small arm shaking. "The train stopped," he said between hiccuping sobs. "Mama told me to stay by the tracks. She said she would come back, but she did not come back." Vincent felt cold dread settle in his stomach despite the oppressive heat. A woman would not leave her child beside the railroad tracks unless something terrible had happened. He scanned the horizon again, looking for any sign of movement, any indication of where the mother might have gone or what might have befallen her. "How long ago did your mama leave you here, Thomas?" The boy shrugged, his little face crumpling again. "I do not know. The sun was over there." He pointed to the east, indicating it had been morning. Vincent glanced at the sun now, seeing it had traveled well past its zenith. The child had been out here for hours. "All right, listen to me, Thomas. I am going to help you find your mama, but first we need to get you somewhere safe." "Can you ride a horse?" Thomas nodded, though he looked uncertain. Vincent stood and walked back to his gelding, a sturdy bay named Copper who had carried him faithfully across 3 states. He pulled his canteen from the saddle and returned to the boy, crouching down again to offer him water. "Drink slowly," Vincent instructed, watching as Thomas gulped at the canteen with desperate thirst. "Easy now. You will make yourself sick if you drink too fast." After Thomas had his fill, Vincent lifted the boy into his arms, surprised at how light he was, and carried him to Copper. He settled Thomas in the saddle before mounting up behind him, his arms encircling the child to hold the reins. "We are going to follow the tracks and see if we can find any sign of your mama," Vincent said. "I want you to tell me if you remember anything else about what happened, all right?" Thomas nodded against Vincent's chest, and they started west along the tracks at a steady walk. Vincent kept his eyes sharp, looking for any disturbance in the dust, any indication of where a woman might have gone. The boy had stopped crying now, exhausted from his ordeal, and Vincent could feel the small body growing heavy with sleep against him. They had traveled perhaps 2 miles when Vincent spotted something that made him pull Copper to a halt. There, about 100 yards north of the tracks, was a small homestead that he had not noticed from a distance. The wooden structure was barely more than a shack, weathered gray by wind and sun, but smoke rose from a crooked chimney. "Did your mama go toward that house?" Vincent asked Thomas. The boy stirred, looking where Vincent pointed. "I do not know. I could not see her. The train people made her get off, and then the train left, and I could not find her." Vincent felt anger kindle in his chest. The railroad had forced a woman off the train and left her child behind. It made no sense unless she had been unable to pay her fare or had caused some kind of trouble. But what kind of trouble could warrant separating a mother from her child? He urged Copper toward the homestead, approaching cautiously. In this part of Idaho, you never knew what kind of welcome you might receive. Some folks were friendly enough, but others preferred their solitude and would greet visitors with a rifle instead of a handshake. As they drew closer, Vincent could see the place was more substantial than he had first thought. There was a small corral with 2 horses, a chicken coop, and what looked like a root cellar dug into the hillside. Someone lived here and made a go of it, which meant they might have seen something. Before he could call out, the door to the house opened, and a woman stepped onto the narrow porch. Vincent felt his breath catch in his throat, though he could not say exactly why. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a simple calico dress that had been mended in several places. But it was her face that struck him, the combination of strength and wariness in her expression, the way she held herself ready to bolt or fight depending on what happened next. "I do not want any trouble," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the remaining distance. "If you are looking for work, I have none to offer. If you are looking for charity, I have little to spare." Vincent raised one hand in a peaceful gesture, keeping the other around Thomas to hold him steady in the saddle. "I am not looking for either, madam. I found this boy beside the railroad tracks about 2 miles east of here. He says his mama was made to leave the train. I am trying to help him find her." The woman's expression changed immediately, the wariness giving way to concern. She came down from the porch and walked toward them quickly, her eyes fixed on Thomas. "A boy alone by the tracks," she said. "How long has he been out there?" "Since this morning, near as I can figure." She reached up, and Thomas leaned toward her with a fresh burst of tears. "Mama," he sobbed, though Vincent could tell instantly that this woman was not his mother. Still, she took the boy from the saddle with practiced ease and held him close, murmuring soft words of comfort. "Hush now, little one. You are safe," she said, and Vincent heard genuine tenderness in her voice. She looked up at him, and he saw intelligence in her hazel eyes, a quick mind working through the situation. "Come inside. We need to talk about this." Vincent dismounted and tied Copper to a post near the water trough, then followed the woman into her home. The interior was sparse but clean, with a table and chairs, a cook stove, and a narrow bed in the corner. The woman settled Thomas in a chair and went to pour him milk from a covered pitcher, adding a thick slice of bread with butter. "Eat slowly," she instructed, and Thomas obeyed, his hunger overcoming his distress. She turned to Vincent, and he removed his hat out of respect, suddenly aware of how dusty and trail-worn he must look. He was 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and brown hair that needed cutting, and he had not shaved in 3 days. "Thank you for bringing him somewhere safe," she said. "I am Clara Shaw. Vincent Bradford, madam," he paused. "You said you are not his mother." "No." Clara glanced at Thomas, her expression troubled. "But I think I might know who is. About 4 hours ago I heard shouting from the direction of the tracks. I went to see what was happening and saw the eastbound train stopped. There were men arguing with a woman, and then they pushed her off the train. The train started moving again before I could reach them. "Did you see the woman? Did you speak to her?" Clara shook her head. "By the time I got there, she was gone. I saw tracks heading south, away from my place. I followed them for a while, but they led into rocky ground where I lost the trail. I thought maybe she was just a drifter who had tried to ride without paying. I did not realize she had left a child behind." Vincent felt his jaw tighten. What kind of men would take a train away and leave a child alone in the wilderness? "The kind who care more about schedules and rules than people," Clara said quietly. There was something in her voice, a weight of experience that suggested she knew firsthand what it meant to be cast aside by those in power. Thomas had stopped eating and was watching them with wide, frightened eyes. Vincent crouched down beside his chair. "Thomas, I need you to think carefully. When your mama told you to stay by the tracks, did she say anything else? Did she tell you where she was going?" The boy's lower lip trembled. "She said there was a house. She said she would get help and come back for me, but I got scared and I walked, and then I did not know where I was." Vincent looked at Clara. "He probably wandered from where his mother left him. That is why she has not found him yet. She is likely searching in the wrong area." "Then we need to find her before nightfall," Clara said. "The temperature drops fast out here once the sun goes down, and if she is not prepared, she could be in serious trouble." Vincent was surprised by her immediate willingness to help. In his experience, most people would have sent him on his way with a vague direction and a wish for good luck. But Clara was already moving, pulling on a practical pair of boots and taking a canteen from a hook on the wall. "I will come with you," she said. "I know this land better than anyone. If she went south like those tracks indicated, there are only a few places she could be heading." "What about the boy?" Vincent asked. Clara looked at Thomas, clearly torn. "I cannot leave him here alone, and he is too exhausted to ride with us while we search. I could take him into Shoshone City, leave him with the sheriff," Vincent suggested, though the idea of losing time did not sit well with him. "The sheriff is my father," Clara said, and something in her tone made it clear that was not a viable option. "He would ask too many questions and waste time filling out reports while that woman is out there alone." Vincent studied her face, seeing the determination there, and made a decision. "Then we bring him with us. I will rig something to keep him secure in the saddle, and we will move as fast as we can." Clara nodded. "Let me pack some supplies. If we find her and she is in poor condition, we will need water, food, and blankets." They worked quickly and efficiently, and Vincent found himself impressed by how practical Clara was. There was no fussing, no wasted motion, just calm competence as she gathered what they needed. Within 15 minutes, they were mounted and ready to go, with Thomas secured in front of Vincent and Clara riding one of her horses, a tough little mare that looked like it could run all day. Clara led them south from her homestead, following a path that was barely visible among the sagebrush and rocks. The land here was unforgiving, all harsh angles and hidden gullies that could break a horse's leg if you were not careful. Vincent kept Copper steady, trusting Clara to guide them safely. "How long have you lived out here?" he asked as they rode, partly to pass the time and partly because he found himself genuinely curious about this woman who lived alone on the edge of nowhere. 3 years, Clara said without looking back. "I filed a claim under the Homestead Act. Built that house myself." "By yourself?" Vincent could not keep the surprise from his voice. "I had help for the heavy timbers," Clara admitted. "But yes, mostly by myself. My father did not approve of a woman living alone, but I wanted my own place. I wanted to prove I could make it on my own." Vincent heard the edge of defiance in her words and understood it. He knew what it was to want independence, to need to prove something to yourself and the world. "That is admirable," he said, and meant it. Clara glanced back at him, and he saw a flicker of something warm in her eyes before she turned her attention back to the trail. "Thank you. Most men think I am crazy. Most men are fools." That earned him a small smile, and Vincent felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. He told himself it was just the satisfaction of making someone smile, nothing more. But he knew he was lying to himself even as the thought formed. They rode for another hour, and the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Thomas had fallen asleep against Vincent's chest, worn out from fear and relief and the gentle rocking of the horse's gait. Vincent kept one arm wrapped securely around the boy, his other hand managing the reins with practiced ease. Clara raised her hand suddenly, signaling a stop. Vincent pulled Copper alongside her mare, and she pointed down into a shallow ravine. "There," she said quietly. "Do you see?" Vincent followed her gesture and spotted a splash of color against the drab landscape, blue fabric that stood out against the browns and grays of rock and dirt. His heart began to beat faster as Clara urged her horse down the slope, and he followed carefully, not wanting to jostle Thomas awake. As they drew closer, Vincent could see it was indeed a woman, lying motionless on the ground near a scraggly juniper tree. Clara dismounted quickly and hurried to the woman's side, kneeling down to check for signs of life. "She is breathing," Clara called out, and Vincent felt relief wash through him. "But she is unconscious. Help me." Vincent dismounted carefully, adjusting Thomas so the boy remained asleep against his shoulder, then carried him to a flat spot under another tree where he laid him down gently. Then he joined Clara beside the unconscious woman. She was young, perhaps 30, with fair hair that had come loose from its pins and skin that was burned red from sun exposure. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and when Clara lifted her hand, Vincent could see her pulse fluttering weakly at her wrist. "Heat exhaustion," Clara said. "Maybe heat stroke. We need to cool her down and get water into her slowly." They worked together, Vincent supporting the woman's shoulders while Clara dripped water onto her lips and used a dampened cloth to cool her face and neck. It took several long minutes, but eventually the woman's eyelids fluttered and opened. "Easy," Clara said softly. "Do not try to move too quickly. You are safe now." The woman's eyes were unfocused at first, but then they sharpened with sudden panic. "Thomas," she gasped. "My son, the tracks. I have to get back to him." "Your son is safe," Vincent said quickly. "I found him by the tracks and brought him with me. He is right over there, sleeping." The woman's head turned, and when she saw Thomas lying peacefully under the tree, she let out a sob that was half relief and half anguish. "Thank God! Oh, thank God!" "What is your name?" Clara asked gently, still holding the canteen to the woman's lips. Catherine Morrison." She took a shaking breath. "I am sorry, I did not mean to cause trouble. I just needed to get to boys. My sister lives there, and I thought if I could just get there, everything would be all right." "What happened on the train?" Vincent asked. Catherine's face crumpled with shame. "I had a ticket, but only for me. I hid Thomas as best I could, but the conductor found him. He said I had to pay for his fare too, but I did not have the money. I offered him my wedding ring, but he said it was not enough. He said we had to get off at the next stop, but there was no stop, just empty land. He made us get off anyway, and the train started moving before I could grab Thomas. I ran after it, screaming, but it just kept going. And then I realized Thomas was not with me, and I tried to run back, but I got turned around in the heat, and I could not find the tracks again." She was crying now, tears streaming down her sun-damaged face, and Clara put an arm around her shoulders. "It is all right," Clara said. "You are both safe now. That is what matters." "How could they do that?" Catherine whispered. "How could they leave a child alone like that?" Vincent felt rage burning in his gut, but he kept his voice calm. "Some people do not have hearts, madam, but you do not need to worry about that now. We need to get you somewhere safe where you can recover." Catherine tried to stand, but her legs would not support her, and she nearly collapsed. Vincent caught her, lifting her into his arms as easily as he had lifted Thomas earlier. "Clara, can she stay at your place tonight?" he asked. "I do not think she is strong enough to make it all the way to town." Clara nodded. "Of course, bring her." They made their way back up the slope, Vincent carrying Catherine while Clara led both horses. Once they reached level ground, they worked out a solution, with Catherine riding double with Clara and Thomas still secured in front of Vincent. The sun was setting now, streaking the sky with purple and crimson, and the temperature was already starting to drop. The ride back to Clara's homestead took less time than the search had, and by the time they arrived, full darkness had settled over the land. Clara lit lamps while Vincent carried Catherine inside and settled her on the bed. Thomas woke up then, and when he saw his mother, he ran to her with a cry of joy. "Mama! Mama!" Catherine held her son close, both of them crying, and Vincent felt his throat tighten with emotion he thought he had buried years ago. He turned away to give them privacy and found Clara watching him with a thoughtful expression. "That was a good thing you did today," she said quietly. "Finding that boy, you probably saved both their lives." Vincent shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Any decent person would have done the same." "You would be surprised," Clara said, and there was that note of experience in her voice again, that suggestion of hard lessons learned. She moved to the cook stove and began preparing food, and Vincent found himself wanting to help, wanting to be useful. "What can I do?" he asked. Clara glanced at him, and he saw surprise flicker across her face, as if she was not used to men offering to help with domestic tasks. "There is a pump outside and a basin. If you could bring in water for washing, that would be helpful." Vincent went out into the cool night air, taking a moment to breathe deeply and settle his thoughts. It had been a long day, full of unexpected turns, and he was not entirely sure what to make of any of it. He had been on his way to Shoshone City to see about work at one of the ranches in the area, just passing through like he always did, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But now, he found himself in the home of a woman who intrigued him more than anyone had in years, helping to care for a mother and child he had never met before today. He pumped water into the basin and carried it inside, where Clara directed him to set it near the bed so Catherine could wash herself and Thomas. Then Clara dished out plates of beans and cornbread, simple fare but filling, and they all ate together in companionable quiet. Thomas fell asleep again soon after eating, and Catherine was not far behind, her body demanding rest to recover from her ordeal. Clara covered them both with blankets, and then she and Vincent stepped outside onto the porch, where the stars blazed overhead in a display so brilliant it took Vincent's breath away. "You can sleep in the barn if you want," Clara said. "There is clean hay and some old blankets. It is not much, but it is warm." "That is more than generous," Vincent said. "Thank you." They stood there in silence for a moment, and Vincent found himself acutely aware of Clara's presence beside him, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the way the lamplight from inside outlined her profile. "What brings you to Idaho?" Clara asked suddenly. "You do not sound like you are from around here." "Texas originally," Vincent said, "but I have been moving around for the past few years, working ranches, doing odd jobs, never staying too long in one place, running from something." Vincent looked at her sharply, but there was no judgment in her face, only curiosity. "Maybe," he admitted, "or running towards something. I have not decided which yet." Clara nodded as if she understood. "I know that feeling." Sometimes you have to put distance between yourself and the past before you can figure out what you want from the future. Is that why you are out here alone, putting distance between yourself and something? Clara was quiet for a long moment, and Vincent thought maybe he had overstepped, pushed too far into territory she did not want to share. But then she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I was married when I was 18, she said, "to a man my father approved of, a deputy in Shoshone City. His name was Frank, and he seemed kind enough before the wedding. But after, things changed. He wanted to control everything I did, where I went, who I spoke to, what I wore, and when I did not obey, he would hit me." Vincent felt his hands curl into fists at his sides, a familiar rage rising in him at the thought of any man raising his hand to a woman. He forced himself to stay quiet, to let Clara tell her story at her own pace. "I tried to leave several times," Clara continued. "But he would always find me, and my father would take his side, tell me I had to be a better wife, more obedient. So finally, I waited until Frank was away on a job and I filed for divorce. It took 2 years to go through, and it cost me almost everything I had, but it was worth it. Then I came out here and built this place, somewhere Frank could not find me, somewhere I could be free." "I am sorry you went through that," Vincent said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Clara looked at him, and he saw strength in her eyes, hard-won and precious. "Do not be sorry. It made me who I am, and I like who I am now." Vincent smiled. "So do I." The words were out before he could stop them, and he saw Clara's eyes widen slightly in surprise. But then she smiled back, a real, genuine smile that transformed her face from pretty to beautiful. And Vincent felt something shift in his chest, like a door he had kept locked for years suddenly swinging open. "You should get some rest," Clara said, but her voice was warm, not dismissive. "Tomorrow, we will need to figure out what to do about Catherine and Thomas." Vincent nodded and headed to the barn, where he made himself as comfortable as possible in the hay. But sleep was a long time coming, because every time he closed his eyes, all he could see was Clara's face illuminated by starlight, and all he could think about was how much he wanted to see that face again in the morning. Dawn came early, as it always did in Idaho during the summer, and Vincent woke to the sound of chickens clucking and horses moving in the corral. He stood and brushed hay from his clothes, then made his way to the pump to wash the sleep from his face. The water was cold and bracing, and it helped clear his head. Clara was already up, working at the cook stove, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon drew Vincent inside like a beacon. Catherine was sitting up in bed, looking much better than she had the night before, and Thomas was playing with a carved wooden horse that Clara must have given him. "Good morning," Clara said when she saw Vincent. "There is coffee in the pot. Help yourself." Vincent poured himself a cup and sat at the table, trying not to stare at Clara as she moved efficiently around the small kitchen. In the morning light, he could see strands of gold in her dark hair, and the way her hands moved with such practiced skill made him wonder about all the things she had taught herself in her years of living alone. "I have been thinking about what to do," Catherine said, drawing Vincent's attention. "I need to get to Boys to my sister's place, but I do not have money for train fare, not for both of us. And after what happened yesterday, I am afraid to try the railroad again." "How far is Boys?" Vincent asked Clara. "About 120 miles west," Clara said. 3 or 4 days by wagon, maybe 5 if you have to go slow." "I do not have a wagon," Catherine said quietly. "I do not have anything except the clothes we are wearing." Vincent saw the despair creeping into her eyes and made a decision. "I will take you." Both women stared at him. "You will what?" Clara asked. "I will take her to Boys. I can buy passage on a stage or rent a wagon in Shoshone City, and I will make sure she and Thomas get to her sister's place safely." "You do not even know me," Catherine said, her voice choked with emotion. "Why would you do that?" Vincent thought about all the times in his life when someone had helped him when they did not have to. The small acts of kindness that had kept him alive and sane during the darkest days after he left Texas. "Because someone did the same for me once," he said simply. "And because it is the right thing to do." Catherine put her face in her hands and wept, but they were tears of relief and gratitude, and Thomas climbed into his mother's lap to comfort her. Clara was watching Vincent with an expression he could not quite read, something between admiration and sadness. "That is very generous of you," Clara said quietly. "Will you come with us?" Vincent asked, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "At least to town to help get them situated." Clara hesitated, and Vincent could see the conflict on her face. "I have work here that needs doing," she said slowly. "The garden needs watering, and the chickens need tending, and there are fence posts that need replacing." "One day," Vincent said. "Just come with us for one day, please." He was not sure why it mattered so much to him, but it did. The thought of riding away from Clara's homestead and never seeing her again left a hollow feeling in his chest that he did not want to examine too closely. Clara looked at him for a long moment, and then she nodded. "All right, one day. But we should leave soon if we want to reach Shoshone City by midday." They ate quickly and prepared for the journey, with Clara packing supplies and Vincent saddling the horses. Catherine was strong enough to ride if they took it slow, so they arranged for her to ride Clara's mare with Thomas seated in front of her, while Clara rode double with Vincent on Copper. As they headed north toward Shoshone City, Vincent was intensely aware of Clara sitting behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, her body pressed against his back. It had been a long time since he had been this close to a woman, and he found his concentration scattered, his usual steady focus disrupted by the warmth of her and the subtle scent of lavender that rose from her hair. "Tell me about Texas," Clara said as they rode, her voice close to his ear. What was it like growing up there? Vincent thought about how to answer that, sorting through memories both good and painful. "Hot," he said finally. "Hotter than here, with humidity that made you feel like you were breathing water. My father had a ranch near San Antonio, cattle mostly. It was a good life when I was young." "What changed?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, debating how much to tell her. But something about Clara made him want to be honest, to share the burden he had been carrying alone for so long. "The war," he said quietly. "I was only 15 when it started, but I lied about my age and joined up. Spent 4 years fighting for the Confederacy, watching good men die for a cause that I came to realize was wrong. When I came home, nothing was the same. My father had died while I was gone, and my mother had remarried a man who did not want me around, so I sold my share of the ranch and left." "I am sorry," Clara said, and he could hear genuine sympathy in her voice. "That must have been hard." "It was a long time ago," Vincent said, though the pain still felt fresh sometimes, especially late at night when memories came creeping in uninvited. "Some things do not stop hurting just because time passes," Clara said quietly, and Vincent knew she was speaking from her own experience. They rode in comfortable silence after that, and Vincent found himself relaxing into Clara's presence, enjoying the simple pleasure of her company. When Shoshone City came into view, a collection of wooden buildings spread along the tracks with mountains rising behind them, he felt a pang of regret that the ride was ending. The town was busier than Vincent had expected, with people moving along the dusty main street and wagons pulled up in front of the general store. Clara directed them to a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who agreed to give Catherine and Thomas a room for a few nights while Vincent made arrangements for their journey to Boise. "I will pay for the stage fare," Vincent told Catherine as they stood outside the boarding house. "And I will give you some money to tide you over until you can get settled with your sister." "I cannot accept all that," Catherine protested. "You have already done so much." "Yes, you can," Vincent said firmly. "And you will. I want to know that you and Thomas are going to be all right." Catherine hugged him then, fierce and quick, and whispered thank you before hurrying inside with Thomas. Vincent stood there feeling awkward and pleased all at once, not used to such open gratitude. "You are a good man, Vincent Bradford," Clara said beside him. Vincent shook his head. "I am just a man trying to do better than I did in the past." "That is what makes you good," Clara said. They walked together down the main street, and Vincent found himself acutely aware of the glances people gave them, particularly the older women who looked at Clara with expressions ranging from disapproval to outright hostility. He wondered what stories they had heard about the woman who lived alone outside of town, what judgments they had passed without knowing the truth of her situation. "Let me buy you lunch," Vincent said impulsively. "As a thank you for all your help." Clara looked surprised but pleased. "There is a cafe near the bank that serves decent food. Nothing fancy, but the portions are generous." The cafe was small but clean, with checked tablecloths and wildflowers in jars on each table. They ordered roast chicken and vegetables, and as they waited for their food, Vincent found himself studying Clara's face, memorizing the curve of her cheek and the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. "What are you going to do after you see Catherine off to Boise?" Clara asked. Vincent realized he had not thought that far ahead. "I suppose I will keep moving, look for work somewhere. I heard there are ranches hiring hands up near the Snake River." "You do not ever want to settle down, find a place to call home?" Vincent considered the question carefully. A week ago he would have said no without hesitation, but something had changed in the past 2 days, something he could not quite put into words. "I never thought I did," he said slowly. "But maybe I was wrong, maybe I was just waiting to find the right place, or the right reason to stay." Clara held his gaze, and Vincent saw color rise in her cheeks, saw understanding dawn in her eyes. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and Vincent felt his heart beating faster in his chest. Their food arrived then, breaking the spell, and they ate while talking about safer topics like the weather and the upcoming harvest. But underneath the casual conversation, Vincent could feel something building, a connection forming that felt both exciting and terrifying. After lunch, they walked to the stage office, where Vincent arranged and paid for Catherine and Thomas's passage to Boise. The stage would leave the next morning, and Vincent made sure Mrs. Patterson knew to have them ready on time. "You should come back to the homestead with me," Clara said as they stood outside the stage office. "It will be dark soon, and you will need a place to stay anyway." Vincent knew he should probably find a room in town, maintain some distance and propriety, but he found himself nodding before he could think better of it. "If you are sure you do not mind the company." "I do not mind," Clara said, and the way she looked at him made Vincent's pulse quicken. They stopped by the general store to pick up a few supplies Clara needed, and Vincent added some coffee and sugar to the order, insisting on paying despite Clara's protests. Then they headed back toward her homestead, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. As they rode, Vincent found himself thinking about what it would be like to stay in one place, to wake up every morning knowing where he would be sleeping that night, to have something more than wandering and temporary work to fill his days. The idea had always seemed stifling before, but now, with Clara's arms around his waist and the Idaho landscape stretching out before them, It felt less like a cage and more like a promise. They reached Clara's homestead as the sun was beginning to set, and Vincent helped her with the evening chores, feeding the horses and chickens and hauling water from the spring. It was simple work, peaceful work, and he found himself enjoying it more than he had enjoyed anything in a long time. Clara made dinner while Vincent sat at her table and watched, and they talked about everything and nothing, their conversation flowing as easily as water over smooth stones. She told him about her childhood in Shoshone City, about her mother who had died when Clara was 12, about her father's increasing rigidity as he aged. Vincent told her about his years of drifting, about the jobs he had worked and the places he had seen, about the loneliness that had become so constant he barely noticed it anymore. "You ever get lonely out here?" Vincent asked as they finished eating. Clara was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. "Sometimes," she admitted, "especially in winter when the snow makes it hard to get to town. But it is better than being lonely in a house with someone who does not really see you, does not really care about who you are. At least out here, I am lonely on my own terms." Vincent understood that more than he could say. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "Sometimes being alone is the only way to feel free." Clara looked at him, and Vincent saw recognition in her eyes, an understanding that went beyond words. They sat there in the lamplight, the silence between them comfortable and charged all at once, and Vincent knew with sudden certainty that something was happening here, something important that would change the course of his life if he let it. "I should probably head to the barn," Vincent said finally, though every part of him wanted to stay right where he was. Clara nodded but did not move. "Vincent," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I am glad you found Thomas yesterday. I am glad you came here." "So am I," Vincent said, and he meant it with everything in him. He stood and moved toward the door, but on impulse, he turned back. Clara had risen from her chair, and they stood facing each other across the small room, the space between them feeling both infinite and negligible. "Can I come back?" Vincent asked. "After I see Catherine and Thomas off tomorrow, can I come back here?" Clara smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." Vincent smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in years, and then he forced himself to walk out the door and across the yard to the barn. But sleep was even more elusive than the night before, because now he was not just thinking about Clara's face in starlight. He was thinking about the possibility of a future, of staying somewhere and building something instead of always moving on. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Vincent woke early to help Clara with her chores before they headed back to town. They rode together in companionable silence, and when they reached Shoshone City, they found Catherine and Thomas already waiting outside the boarding house with their few belongings. The stage pulled up right on time, and Vincent helped Catherine and Thomas climb aboard. Catherine hugged him again, and this time she hugged Clara too, whispering words of thanks that brought tears to both women's eyes. "Be safe," Vincent said as the stage driver climbed up to his seat. "And write to let us know you arrived safely. Send the letter to Clara's address in care of Shoshone City General Delivery." Catherine nodded, clutching Thomas close, and then the stage was pulling away in a cloud of dust. Vincent and Clara stood watching until it disappeared from sight, and then they turned to look at each other. "I meant what I said last night," Vincent said. "About coming back. If you will have me, I would like to stay in the area, find work at one of the local ranches, maybe help you with your homestead when I have time." Clara's eyes were bright, and Vincent could see hope warring with caution in her expression. "I want that," she said carefully, "but I need you to understand something. I am not looking to get married again. I am not looking to give up my independence or my claim to my land. If you stay, it has to be because you want to be with me as I am, not because you are hoping to change me into something else." Vincent stepped closer, close enough to take her hands in his. "Clara, I have spent the last 5 years running from everything that mattered because I was afraid of being trapped, afraid of losing myself. But yesterday, when I found Thomas, and then when I met you, something changed. You are the first person I have met who understands what it means to need freedom, to need space to be yourself. I am not looking to trap you or change you. I just want to know you better. I want to see where this goes." Clara squeezed his hands and a smile bloomed across her face like flowers in spring. "Then yes," she said. "Stay, let us see where this goes." Vincent felt joy surge through him, and he pulled Clara into his arms, holding her close while people walked past and stared. He did not care. For the first time in years, he felt like he had found something worth staying for. They spent the rest of the day in town, with Vincent asking around about work and Clara introducing him to the people she trusted. By evening, Vincent had lined up a job at her ranch 20 miles north of Clara's homestead, starting the following week. The pay was decent, and the foreman said Vincent could have Sundays off, which meant he would have time to visit Clara and help with her place. As they rode back to the homestead that evening, Vincent felt a contentment settling over him that he had not experienced since before the war. The future, which had always seemed like a vast and empty road stretching into nothing, now had shape and color and possibility. Over the following weeks, Vincent settled into a rhythm that felt more like living than anything he had done in years. He worked hard at the ranch during the week, learning the routines and proving his worth to the other hands. And every Sunday, he rode to Clara's homestead, where he helped her with projects and chores, and they spent long hours talking and laughing and slowly, carefully, learning to trust each other. Clara was unlike any woman Vincent had ever known. She was strong and capable, able to handle everything from mending fences to breaking horses. But she was also tender and thoughtful, always ready with a kind word or a listening ear. She taught him about the plants that grew in the Idaho desert, which ones were edible and which ones had medicinal properties. She showed him how to read the weather in the shapes of clouds and the behavior of animals. And Vincent, in turn, shared himself with her in ways he had never shared with anyone. He told her about the nightmares that still woke him sometimes, echoes of battles long past. He told her about the guilt he carried for fighting on the wrong side of the war, for defending slavery even though he had come to see how evil it was. He told her about his fear that he was not good enough, not whole enough, to deserve happiness. Clara listened to it all without judgment, and then she shared her own fears and guilt, her own doubts and dreams. She told him about the shame she still felt sometimes for failing at her marriage, even though she knew logically that the failure was not hers. She told him about her anger at her father for choosing Frank over her, for valuing a man's reputation over his daughter's safety. She told him about her fear that she would never be able to trust a man enough to let him close again. "But I am learning to trust you," she said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the stars come out. "It is slow, and some days are harder than others, but I am learning." Vincent reached over and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I am not going anywhere," he said quietly. "I promise you that. I am here for as long as you want me." Clara turned to look at him, and in the starlight her eyes were luminous. "I want you for a very long time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent felt his heart stutter in his chest, and before he could talk himself out of it, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative at first, a question more than a statement, but when Clara kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his cheek, It deepened into something more, something that spoke of longing and hope and the possibility of healing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against Clara's and smiled. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "So have I," Clara said, and she laughed, the sound bright and free. As summer turned to fall and fall gave way to the first hints of winter, Vincent and Clara's relationship deepened and grew. They were careful with each other, both aware of how fragile new trust could be, but the foundation they were building felt solid and true. Vincent had never been happier. The work at the ranch was satisfying. The other hands had accepted him as one of their own, and every Sunday with Clara felt like a gift. They had fallen into an easy intimacy, comfortable with silence and laughter alike, and Vincent found himself thinking about the future in concrete terms instead of vague possibilities. It was in November, with the first snow beginning to fall and the wind cutting sharp across the plains, that Vincent made his decision. He had been carrying his grandmother's ring in his pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, the perfect words. But as he sat with Clara in front of her fireplace, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind howl outside, he realized there were no perfect words, no ideal moment. There was only this, the two of them together, and the love he felt for her that had grown from a spark into a steady flame. "Clara," he said, setting down his coffee cup and turning to face her, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you answer." Clara looked at him with curiosity and a hint of wariness. "All right." Vincent took a deep breath. "I know you said you were not looking to get married again, and I respect that. But I love you. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you, however you will have me. If that means we get married, wonderful. If it means we just keep going as we are, that is wonderful too. I do not need a piece of paper to commit myself to you. But I wanted you to know how I feel, and I wanted to ask if you would consider being my wife, not because I want to own you or control you, but because I want to stand beside you and face whatever comes next together." He pulled out the ring, a simple gold band with a small garnet, and held it out to her. "This was my grandmother's. She gave it to me before I left Texas, told me to give it to a woman who deserved it. You are that woman, Clara. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and you deserve everything good in this world. So I am asking, will you marry me?" Clara stared at the ring, and Vincent saw tears gathering in her eyes. For a long moment she did not speak, and Vincent felt fear clench in his stomach. Had he pushed too hard, asked too much, ruined everything? But then Clara looked up at him, and she was smiling through her tears. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Yes, Vincent, I will marry you, not because I need a husband, but because I want a partner. I want you. I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone after Frank. You have shown me what love is supposed to be like, patient and kind and respectful. So yes, I will marry you." Vincent's hands were shaking as he slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, and when she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, he felt tears on his own cheeks, tears of joy and relief, and gratitude that somehow, despite everything, he had found his way to this moment, to this woman, to this life. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Shoshone City, with Mrs. Patterson and a few of Clara's friends in attendance. Clara's father did not come, which saddened Clara but did not surprise her, and Vincent wished his own family could be there to see him happy at last. But it did not matter, because when Clara smiled at him in her simple white dress with wildflowers in her hair, Vincent knew he had everything he needed. They spent their wedding night at Clara's homestead, which was now their homestead, and Vincent felt a sense of rightness settle over him as he carried Clara over the threshold. This was home, This was where he belonged, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure Clara knew how precious she was, how grateful he was that she had taken a chance on him. Winter was hard that year, with snow piling high and temperatures dropping so low that Vincent worried constantly about the livestock and whether their supplies would last. But he and Clara weathered it together, huddled by the fireplace on the worst nights, telling stories and making plans for spring. When the thaw finally came in March, they planted a larger garden than Clara had ever attempted on her own, knowing that Vincent's income from the ranch and Clara's income from selling eggs and vegetables would combine to give them a comfortable living. They repaired the barn and added a second room to the house, preparing for the family they both hoped to have someday. It was in May, as wildflowers bloomed across the desert and the world seemed full of life and promise, that Clara told Vincent she was pregnant. He whooped with joy and spun her around until she laughingly begged him to put her down, and then he kissed her with all the love and wonder he felt bubbling up inside him. Their son was born in January of 1883, during a snowstorm that kept them housebound for 3 days. Vincent delivered the baby himself with Mrs. Patterson's guidance, and when he held the tiny squirming bundle in his arms, he felt his heart break open in ways he had not known were possible. They named him William, after Vincent's father, and he was perfect in every way, with Clara's hazel eyes and Vincent's dark hair. Vincent spent hours just watching him sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and the soft skin, unable to believe that he had helped create something so beautiful. Clara was a natural mother, patient and loving, and watching her with William made Vincent fall in love with her all over again. They were a family now, complete and whole, and Vincent felt his old restlessness finally settle into peace. As William grew from an infant to a toddler, Vincent and Clara's homestead prospered. Word had spread about Clara's skills with horses, and people began bringing animals to her for training. Vincent took on more responsibilities at the ranch and was eventually promoted to foreman, with a raise in pay that allowed them to make improvements to their property. They heard from Catherine Morrison occasionally, letters arriving from boys with news of her life with her sister and Thomas's growth. She had found work as a seamstress and was saving money to open her own shop someday. She always ended her letters with thanks to Vincent and Clara for saving her life and Thomas's, and Vincent always wrote back with news of their own lives and encouragement for her dreams. In the summer of 1884, Clara gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had Vincent's brown eyes and Clara's smile, and William was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her and help care for her. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of love and laughter, of small challenges and smaller triumphs. Vincent could not believe how far he had come from the lonely drifter who had found a crying boy beside the tracks just 2 years earlier. That moment had changed everything, had set him on a path that led to Clara and to this life they had built together. He thought sometimes about the choices he had made, the roads he had traveled, the pain he had survived. And while he could not change the past, could not undo the mistakes he had made or the hurts he had caused, he could move forward with intention and purpose, could be the kind of man his children would be proud of, the kind of husband Clara deserved. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Vincent and Clara stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. William was playing in the yard with a wooden horse Vincent had carved for him, and Rose was sleeping peacefully inside. "You ever miss it?" Clara asked, leaning against Vincent's shoulder. The traveling, the freedom of moving on whenever you wanted. Vincent thought about it, really considered the question, and then shook his head. "No," he said honestly. I thought freedom meant having no ties, no responsibilities, nothing holding me in place. But I was wrong. Real freedom is being with someone who sees you for who you are and loves you anyway. Real freedom is having a place where you belong and people who need you. I am more free now than I ever was on the road. Clara looked up at him, her eyes warm and bright. I feel the same way. I thought I needed to be alone to be free, but you showed me I can be with someone and still be myself. We gave each other the best kind of freedom, the freedom to be loved exactly as we are. Vincent kissed her then, soft and sweet, and thought about all the years stretching ahead of them, all the sunsets they would watch together, all the challenges they would face and overcome side by side. It was not a perfect life, because no life was perfect, but it was a good life, a life worth living, and that was more than enough. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Vincent called William over and lifted him up onto his shoulders. Clara appeared with Rose in her arms, and together, the four of them stood looking out at the land they called home, at the future spreading before them full of possibility and promise. Years passed, and the Bradford family continued to grow and thrive. In 1886, Clara gave birth to twins, two boys they named James and Daniel, and their house rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Vincent expanded the barn and added more horses to Clara's training business, and between his work as ranch foreman and her growing reputation as a horse trainer, they were able to save money and invest in more land. William grew into a serious, thoughtful child who loved books and learning. Vincent taught him to ride and rope, but it was clear the boy's heart lay in other directions. When William was 8, Vincent arranged for him to attend school in Shoshone City during the week, boarding with Mrs. Patterson, who had grown fond of the Bradford family over the years. Rose was her mother's daughter, fearless and independent, more comfortable in the corral with horses than in the house with dolls. By the time she was 6, she could gentle a skittish colt better than most grown men, and Clara beamed with pride watching her daughter work. The twins were mischievous and adventurous, always getting into trouble but always together, an inseparable unit that reminded Vincent of stories his mother used to tell about her twin brothers. They kept Vincent and Clara on their toes, but they also filled the house with joy and energy. In 1890, Clara became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was harder than the others had been. Vincent worried constantly, hovering over Clara even as she laughingly told him she was fine. But when their 5th child, another daughter they named Grace, was born healthy and strong, Vincent wept with relief. The homestead had grown from Clara's small cabin into a proper ranch, with a large house, multiple barns, corrals, and fields. Vincent had hired 2 hands to help with the work, young men from town who were learning the trade and grateful for steady employment. Clara's horse training business was thriving, with people coming from as far away as boys to buy horses she had trained. On Sundays, the family would gather on the porch after church, and Vincent would tell stories about his childhood in Texas, or his years of wandering before he settled in Idaho. The children loved these stories, even though they had heard them dozens of times, and Vincent loved the feeling of passing on his history, of giving his children roots that he had lacked for so many years. Clara would tell stories, too, about growing up in Shoshone City, and about her grandmother who had immigrated from Ireland and taught Clara to be strong and independent. She talked about the hard times and the good times with equal honesty, wanting her children to understand that life was both beautiful and difficult, and that was all right. In 1892, Catherine Morrison came to visit with Thomas, who was now a young man of 15. They stayed for a week, and it was joyful to see how well they had done, how Catherine had built a successful dress shop in Boys, and how Thomas was apprenticing with a carpenter and learning a trade. Thomas spent hours with William, the two young men talking about their dreams and aspirations, and Vincent watched with satisfaction, knowing that his decision to help a crying boy beside the tracks all those years ago had rippled outward in ways he never could have imagined. "You changed our lives," Catherine told Vincent and Clara on the last night of their visit, as they sat on the porch watching the stars. "If you had not found Thomas that day, if you had not helped us, I do not know what would have happened. We probably would have died out there in the desert. Instead, we got a second chance and we have made the most of it. I will never be able to thank you enough." "You do not need to thank us," Clara said warmly. "We just did what anyone should do, what any decent person would do." "But not everyone would," Catherine said quietly. "Most people would have passed by, would have thought it was not their problem. You too are special, and I want you to know how much you mean to us." Vincent felt Clara's hand slip into his, and he squeezed it gently, thinking about how strange and wonderful life could be, how a single moment of compassion could change everything. As the children grew older, Vincent and Clara watched with pride and sometimes with concern as they found their own paths in life. William went to college in Boys, studying to become a teacher, and Vincent supported the decision even though part of him had hoped his oldest son would stay and work the ranch. But he remembered his own need to forge his own way, and he refused to be the kind of father who tried to force his children into roles they did not want. Rose announced when she was 16 that she had no intention of marrying, that she wanted to spend her life working with horses, and Clara hugged her daughter tight and told her that was wonderful. Vincent agreed, though he also told Rose that she might change her mind someday, and if she did, that would be wonderful too. The important thing was that she lived her life on her own terms. The twins went to work at the ranch as soon as they were old enough, and they took to the work like they had been born to it. Vincent trained them himself, teaching them everything he knew about cattle and horses and the land, and he saw in them a love for the life that made his heart full. Grace was still young, only 8 when Rose made her declaration about never marrying, and she declared that she wanted to be a horse trainer like her mother and a rancher like her father. And Vincent laughed and told her she could be anything she wanted to be. In 1895, Clara's father died, and despite everything, Clara grieved. She had not spoken to him in years, not since he had refused to support her when she divorced Frank, but he was still her father, and his death left a hole in her heart. Vincent held her while she cried and listened while she talked about the good memories from her childhood, before everything had gone wrong. They attended the funeral together, and Vincent stood beside Clara while people whispered and stared, judging her for leaving her husband all those years ago, for building a life without permission or approval. But Vincent did not care what they thought, and neither did Clara, not anymore. They had built something real and lasting, something based on mutual respect and genuine love, and that was worth more than the approval of people who could not understand what they had. That same year, Thomas Morrison married a young woman from Boys, and he invited Vincent and Clara to the wedding. They made the trip with all 5 children, and it was a joyful occasion, full of laughter and music and celebration. Thomas told everyone who would listen about how Vincent had saved him when he was a boy, how Vincent and Clara had given him and his mother a second chance at life. And Vincent felt embarrassed by the attention, but also deeply grateful that he had been in the right place at the right time all those years ago. As the century drew to a close, Vincent found himself reflecting more and more on the life he had lived, the choices he had made, the people he had loved. He was 47 years old now, his hair starting to show threads of silver, his body showing the wear of years of hard work. But he was happy, genuinely happy, in a way he had never imagined possible when he was younger. He watched Clara, now 43 and still beautiful to him, still strong and capable, and everything he could have hoped for in a partner. They had built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered, full of love and laughter and purpose. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1897, Vincent took Clara back to the spot where he had first found Thomas beside the tracks. They stood there holding hands, looking out at the vast desert landscape, and Vincent thought about how much had changed in 15 years. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not found him that day?" Clara asked softly. "If you had just ridden past?" Vincent shook his head. "I do not wonder because it does not matter. I did find him, and that led me to you, and that is all I need to know." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Vincent Bradford. I have loved you since the day you brought that crying boy to my door and asked for help. I loved your kindness, your gentleness, your strength. And I love you more now than I did then, which I did not think was possible." Vincent turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you too, Clara. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You taught me what it means to be truly free, truly happy. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to believe in myself. I would live these 15 years over and over again if I could, exactly as they were, just to end up here with you." They kissed there beside the tracks, in the place where their story had begun. And Vincent felt the same rush of emotion he had felt on their wedding day, the same certainty that this was right. This was real. This was forever. The new century arrived with celebrations across the country, and the Bradford family marked the occasion with a large gathering at their ranch. Catherine and Thomas came from Boise, along with Thomas's wife and their new baby. Mrs. Patterson came from town, older now but still sharp and kind. The ranch hands and their families came, and neighbors from surrounding homesteads, and the house and yard were full of people eating and talking and laughing. William was home from college, where he was in his final year of studies. Rose, now 19, was running the horse training business almost entirely on her own and doing it brilliantly. The twins, 17 and full of energy, entertained everyone with stories and jokes. And Grace, 13 now and growing into a beautiful young woman, helped Clara prepare food and organize the celebration with efficiency beyond her years. As Vincent stood on his porch looking out at all these people, at the life he and Clara had built, he felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He thought about that lonely, restless man he had been 18 years ago, riding aimlessly through the desert with no destination and no purpose. He thought about the moment he had heard a child crying beside the tracks, the moment that had changed everything. If he had ignored that cry, if he had told himself it was not his problem, if he had been too tired or too selfish or too afraid, none of this would exist. There would be no William studying to be a teacher, no Rose working with horses she loved, no twins laughing with friends, no Grace organizing celebrations. There would be no Clara beside him, no years of love and partnership and growth. One small act of kindness, one moment of compassion, had created all of this. And Vincent understood, in a way he never had before, that this was what life was really about. Not grand gestures or heroic deeds, but small acts of decency, of caring, of seeing another person's need and choosing to help even when it was inconvenient or difficult. Clara came to stand beside him, slipping her arm through his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," Vincent said simply, "and nothing, and how grateful I am for all of it." Clara smiled, that smile that still made his heart skip a beat after all these years. "Me too," she said. "Me too." As the sun set on the first day of the 20th century, Vincent and Clara stood together surrounded by family and friends, by love and laughter and the life they had built together. The future stretched ahead of them, unknown but full of promise, and they would face it together, hand in hand, just as they had faced everything for the past 15 years. William graduated from college in the spring of 1900 and took a teaching position in Shoshone City, much to the delight of Mrs. Patterson, who was thrilled to have him close by. He boarded with her again, and she treated him like the grandson she had never had. Rose expanded the horse training business, buying more land adjacent to the Bradford Ranch and building her own barns and corrals. She hired 2 women from town to help her, scandalizing some of the more conservative residents, but earning respect from those who saw the quality of her work. The twins decided to buy their own ranch, pooling their savings with a loan from Vincent and Clara, and starting their own cattle operation 20 miles to the north. Vincent helped them get started, proud of their initiative and their willingness to work hard for what they wanted. Grace, at 16, declared her intention to become a veterinarian, and Vincent and Clara supported this dream even though it meant she would need to leave Idaho to attend school in California. The thought of their youngest child being so far away was painful, but they had learned over the years that loving your children meant supporting their dreams, not trying to keep them close out of selfishness. In 1902, Catherine Morrison wrote to tell them that her dress shop had burned down in a fire, and she had lost everything. Without hesitation, Vincent and Clara sent her enough money to start over, and they invited her to come stay with them while she rebuilt her life. Catherine declined the invitation to stay, saying she needed to prove to herself that she could overcome this setback, but she accepted the money gratefully and promised to pay it back. "You do not need to pay it back," Vincent wrote in his response. "You gave us something far more valuable than money. You gave us each other. If I had not found Thomas that day, I never would have met Clara, and none of this life we have built would exist. Consider the money a small repayment for the gift you unknowingly gave us." In 1904, William married a young woman he had met in Shoshone City, a school teacher like himself named Anne. The wedding was beautiful, held at the ranch with all the family in attendance, and Vincent walked William down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering the serious little boy who had loved books more than horses. Rose surprised everyone by announcing her engagement to one of the women she had hired to help with the horse training, a quiet woman named Sarah who had come from Oregon looking for work. Some people in town were scandalized, but Vincent and Clara welcomed Sarah into the family without hesitation, understanding that love came in many forms and that their daughter's happiness was what mattered most. The twins both married within a year of each other, twins themselves marrying twins from a neighboring ranch, and the wedding was a lively, chaotic affair that had everyone talking for months. Vincent and Clara hosted the celebration at their ranch, and it was one of the happiest days of Vincent's life, seeing his sons so clearly in love and so ready to start their own families. Grace left for California in 1905, and Clara cried for days after she left, though she tried to hide it from Vincent. He held her at night while she grieved the loss of their youngest child to distance and independence, and he reminded her that Grace would come back, that California was not forever, that they had raised their children to fly, and now they had to let them. In 1906, the great San Francisco earthquake struck, and for 3 agonizing days, Vincent and Clara had no news of Grace. They paced and prayed and sent telegrams that went unanswered, and Vincent felt fear like he had not felt since the war, the terror of not knowing if someone you loved was alive or dead. But then a telegram arrived, brief and to the point. I am safe. School damaged, but I am unhurt. Do not worry. Love, Grace. Vincent and Clara held each other and wept with relief, and they sent money and supplies to help with the recovery. And they wrote to Grace every day for a month just to reassure themselves that she was really all right. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Grandchildren began to arrive, William and Anne having a daughter in 1907, the twins and their wives having a total of 5 children between them over the next few years. Rose and Sarah adopted a young girl who had been orphaned, giving her a home and a family and all the love she needed. Vincent and Clara moved more slowly now, their bodies showing the effects of decades of hard work, but their minds were sharp and their hearts were full. They still worked the ranch together, though they had hired more help to do the heavy lifting, and they spent more time simply enjoying each other's company, sitting on the porch in the evening and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. In 1910, Grace returned from California with her degree in veterinary medicine, the first woman veterinarian in Idaho and one of only a handful in the entire country. She set up practice in Shoshone City, and people came from all over the state for her services, impressed by her skill and her gentle way with animals. Thomas Morrison visited that same year with his mother Catherine, now in her late 50s but still vibrant and strong. Her dress shop in Boys had become one of the most successful in the city, and she employed a dozen women and was considering opening a second location. Thomas had become a master carpenter, building homes and businesses all over Boys, and he had 3 children of his own now. They all gathered at the Bradford Ranch for a weekend, and Vincent looked around at the assembled group, at all the lives that had been touched by that single moment 18 years ago when he had heard a child crying beside the tracks. It was humbling and awesome and beautiful, and Vincent felt tears gathering in his eyes as he realized the magnitude of what one small act of kindness had created. "Thank you," he said to Catherine and Thomas during dinner that night. "Thank you for giving me the chance to help you, for leading me to Clara, for being part of this amazing story." Catherine reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for stopping," she said simply. "Thank you for caring enough to stop." In 1912, Vincent and Clara celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary, and all of their children came home for the occasion, bringing grandchildren and partners and filling the ranch with noise and laughter and love. They had a huge celebration with food and music and dancing, and Vincent and Clara renewed their vows in front of everyone, speaking the same words they had spoken 3 decades earlier, but with even more meaning now, enriched by years of living those vows every single day. Vincent was 60 years old now, his hair completely silver, his face lined with age but also with joy. Clara was 56, still beautiful to him, still the strongest woman he knew, still his partner in every sense of the word. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Vincent and Clara sat on their porch one more time, looking up at the stars that seemed close enough to touch. "If you could go back," Clara asked softly, "knowing everything you know now, would you change anything?" Vincent thought about it, really considered the question. He thought about the war and the pain it had caused, about the years he had spent wandering with no purpose, about the mistakes he had made and the regrets he carried. But then he thought about the moment he had heard Thomas crying, the moment he had met Clara, the life they had built together and the family they had raised. "No," he said finally, "I would not change a single thing. Because everything, the good and the bad, the pain and the joy, it all led me here to you, to this life. And this life is more than I ever dreamed possible." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. The ranch would continue, passed down to their children and grandchildren. The love they had shared would ripple outward through the generations, teaching new hearts what it meant to be kind, to be compassionate, to see someone in need and choose to help even when it was difficult or inconvenient. And it had all started with a crying boy beside the tracks and a cowboy who had asked where his mama was. One moment, one question, one act of decency that had changed everything. As Vincent drifted off to sleep that night with Clara warm beside him, he thought about all the people who had touched his life, all the moments that had led him to this point. And he was grateful, so deeply grateful for every single one of them. The years that followed were slower and quieter, but no less full. Vincent officially retired from the ranch in 1915, turning over the daily operations to the twins and their families, though he still helped out when he could and offered advice when asked. Clara finally retired from horse training in 1916, passing her business to Rose and Sarah, who had built it into one of the most respected operations in the state. They spent their days quietly, tending a small garden, reading together in the evening, welcoming visits from children and grandchildren. Grace came to visit once a month, checking on their health and bringing news from town. William and Anne came every Sunday for dinner, often bringing their children. The twins stopped by regularly, always with some story about the ranch or the cattle or the latest challenge they were facing. In 1918, the world was turned upside down by war again, and Vincent felt old fears resurface as young men from Shoshone City and the surrounding ranches went off to fight in Europe. He was grateful that his grandsons were still too young to serve, but he grieved for the families who lost sons and fathers, remembering too well the cost of war. When the war finally ended, there was celebration but also sorrow, and Vincent and Clara opened their home to a young man from town who had returned from France with terrible injuries and no family to care for him. They gave him work on the ranch, light duties he could manage, and a place to stay in one of the outbuildings, and they helped him slowly heal, both physically and emotionally. In 1920, women finally gained the right to vote, and Clara went to the polling place in Shoshone City with her head held high, casting her ballot with tears in her eyes. She thought about all the years she had fought to be treated as an equal, all the struggles she had endured, and she felt a profound sense of victory, knowing that the world was slowly, finally changing. Vincent and Clara celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1922, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren now. Vincent was 70 years old, Clara 66, and they moved slowly and carefully, their bodies worn out from decades of hard work. But their minds were still sharp, and their love for each other had only deepened with time. 40 years, Clara said, shaking her head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. It has been the best 40 years of my life, Vincent said, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her weathered knuckles. Every single day with you has been a gift. That winter was hard, with heavy snows and bitter cold, and Vincent developed a cough that would not go away. Grace came to examine him and prescribed rest and medicine, but Vincent could see the worry in her eyes, could see her exchanging concerned glances with Clara. "I am all right," he assured them both. "Just old, that is all, nothing to worry about." But the cough persisted through winter and into spring, and Vincent found himself tiring more easily, needing to rest after even small exertions. He did not complain, did not want to worry Clara or the children, but he knew something was wrong, knew his body was finally giving out after 70 years of life. In May of 1923, Vincent suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed on his left side. The family gathered at the ranch, and Grace moved in temporarily to help care for him. Vincent was frustrated by his body's betrayal, by his inability to do the things he had always done, but Clara was patient and loving, helping him with everything and never making him feel like a burden. "We have had a good life," Vincent said to her one evening as she helped him prepare for bed. "A really good life. I have no regrets." "Do not talk like that," Clara said, her voice breaking. "You are going to be fine. You are going to recover, and we are going to have many more years together." But Vincent knew better. He could feel his body shutting down, could feel his time running out. And while he was not ready to leave Clara, was not ready to say goodbye to his children and grandchildren and the life he loved, he also felt a sense of peace. He had lived well. He had loved deeply. He had made a difference in the world, in small ways that had rippled outward into something beautiful. In July of 1923, Vincent Bradford died peacefully in his sleep with Clara beside him, holding his hand. He was 71 years old, and he left behind a legacy of love and kindness that would continue for generations. The funeral was held at the ranch, and it seemed like half of Idaho showed up to pay their respects. People told stories about Vincent's generosity, his kindness, his quiet strength. Catherine and Thomas came from Boise, both of them crying openly as they talked about how Vincent had saved their lives and changed their futures. The ranch hands talked about what a fair and decent boss he had been. His children spoke about what an amazing father he had been, patient and loving and always supportive of their dreams. And Clara, though her heart was breaking, stood strong and graceful, accepting condolences and sharing memories, honoring the man she had loved for 41 years. After everyone had left and Clara was alone in the house that felt too empty now, she sat on the porch and looked up at the stars, remembering all the evenings she and Vincent had sat here together, planning their future and remembering their past. "Thank you," she whispered into the night. "Thank you for finding Thomas that day. Thank you for being brave enough to ask where his mama was. Thank you for bringing him to my door. Thank you for loving me, for building this life with me, for giving me 41 years of happiness. I will miss you every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we spent together." Clara lived for another 12 years after Vincent's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, continuing to be a source of strength and wisdom for her family. She never remarried, never wanted to, because she had already had the great love of her life, and one was enough. She died peacefully in 1935 at the age of 79, and she was buried next to Vincent on a hill overlooking their ranch with a simple headstone that read, "Clara Shaw Bradford. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She lived life on her own terms." The Bradford Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, a testament to what Vincent and Clara had built together. And the story of how they met, the story of a crying boy beside the tracks and a cowboy who stopped to help, was told and retold to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. A reminder that small acts of kindness can change the world in ways we cannot imagine, that compassion matters, that love endures, and that every life is precious and worth saving. Thomas Morrison lived to be 93 years old, and he never forgot the day Vincent Bradford found him crying beside the tracks and asked where his mama was. He told the story to his children and grandchildren, always ending the same way. "That man saved my life and my mother's life, and he did it because he was good and decent and kind. That is the kind of person you should strive to be. That is what really matters in this life." And so the story lived on, a legacy of love and compassion that spread through families and communities and generations, all because one man heard a child crying and chose to stop, chose to care, chose to help. And in doing so, he found not just a crying boy, but his own salvation, his own purpose, his own true home. He found love, he found family, and he found meaning in a life that had once seemed empty and aimless. That is the power of kindness. That is the magic of compassion. That is the truth that Vincent and Clara Bradford lived every day of their lives together. And that truth continues to ripple outward, touching lives and changing hearts, proving that one person can make a difference. That one moment can change everything, and that love, real love, lasts forever.